Hi, and welcome to the Perspective Podcast, Episode 3. We have a late team change today. Laura Williamson from The Athletic is indisposed, sadly. Nothing too serious, and we'll hope to have her on another time. But the good news is that coming off the bench is the great Leo Moynihan, wonderful football author of The Three Kings, which was, if you thought that was good, his new latest book about centre halves, Thou Shall Not Pass, is as good. It's just fantastic, and it's all about centre halves, and they will come up in the conversation. So, Leo, welcome. Great to have
Hello.
you around. And Ian Hawkey survives, however, fit as ever. Another great, in my opinion, great football writer, author of fantastic books about African football, the most brilliant book, which I'm sure you'll be able to plug, Ian, and also a sensational
Funny you should
biography.
say that.
Feet of the Chameleon. It's a great book about African football, which I know is one of Ian's great loves. But today we're going to be talking about Spanish and English football because certainly Ian, as former European football, in fact, still European football correspondent of the Times and Sunday Times, was very much all over the Clásico on Saturday night, as indeed we will be. And of course, my colleague here, co-presenter, I was going to say, but that's probably putting my talents a little bit too high. Omar Garrick. Omar, how has your weekend been? What are your main takes out of the weekend of football?
Well, we'll start off with. Well, my weekend was very good, Paddy. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
I know, I knew
Very
that. Man
relaxing.
United fan.
We'll start off with Spurs v Manchester United. Manchester United, I thought, tore Spurs apart in the second half in particular. The first half was quite slow from both sides. But then immediately the second 45 minutes, once that came into play, United were just a better side all over the pitch. I'll come to Leo first. Where do you think the game was won for United? Because there was numerous standout performances from Cavani, from Greenwood, from Pogba. Where do you think the game was won?
I think the name you mentioned there has to be the first one we talk about, Cavani's form yesterday. Ian got his plug in for his book quite quickly, so I'm going to bring it back to centre halves because I hope Laura gets well, but I am a bit of a stand-in, and I think the whole season's been about stand-in centre halves, hasn't it? And you've got to ask yourself. Poor Roden yesterday. It was a great prospect. I hear very good things about him. People that work with him, like, and people in Wales, told me that kids have got it all. But he was given a runaround by this masterclass of a lone centre forward. We haven't seen it much.
No,
you don't see it all the time anymore, do you? That kind of almost Drogba-like position up front, and he ran them both ragged. I think they were causing problems from the start, and I think that's really where, as he got more into the game and more confident, and actually I think after his disallowed goal, he looked like he had something really to prove to a few people in the ground and at Stockley Park. So I think Cavani's performance really would have been what lifted United to really what was, I think, their best performance of the season.
Yeah, completely agree. That second 45, that was the best I've seen United all season. But in particular, you touched upon the first disallowed goal for Cavani. I know Paddy has spoken about what he thinks about the decision. Paddy, I'll come to you then for this. What did you make of the disallowed goal?
Well, but before Ian comes in on this, I'll be interested in his response afterwards. I suspect that the response of what I'm about to say will be from 99.99% of people will be what twaddle. But here goes. There were two broadly comparable fouls at roughly the same stage of the match. One was committed on Marcus Rashford. It was a flick in the face by Lo Celso, which the experts' analysis on television got wrong. They thought that Rashford was complaining, as he complained for a long time, perhaps 2 minutes afterwards. They thought he was complaining about a foot foul. In fact, he was complaining about a flick in the face. And he was holding his mouth to try and draw the referees and VAR's attention to it. The other one, rather more publicized, was another flick in the face, in my opinion, an even more serious one by McTominay on Son, whose acting was rather more dramatic than Marcus Rashford's had been. Son went down like a sack of spuds. The VAR decided, in my opinion, erroneously, that a clear and obvious error had been missed by the referee and decided to draw the referee's attention to it. Now, in my opinion, it was a foul. I don't think, loads of experts are queuing up to say that it's a natural movement by a player to flick his arms out. Yes, it is. It's also a natural movement by a player to stop a ball from going over the line for a goal. But the law explicitly now prevents that, and it no longer happens. And in my opinion, the same thing should happen to casual flicking out, simply because it is dangerous if you make contact with the eye. For that reason, rugby union, for example, there's no sport in the world that allows flicking out carelessly into the head area. The rugby union, which allows the handoff, which has now crept into football, specifically disallows any negligent sort of flicking out at the face or the eye or face area at all. So rugby won't have it. Why we think it's natural and perfectly part of the game, I don't know. The referee, once the VAR had wrongly drawn his, in my opinion, drawn his attention to it, had a very, very difficult decision to make. If it was being referred to him, his natural inference would have been that the VAR thought it a clear and obvious error, which obviously it wasn't, because a few of us had noticed it. He then had a very difficult decision to make. He had to look at it based on the initial opinion that it was a clear and obvious error and decide whether it was a foul. Well, of course it was a foul. It would have been outrageous if, in my opinion, had he looked at that and decided that no foul had been committed. A foul doesn't have to be deliberate. McTominay might say, yeah, I was just flicking out. It was accidental that I hit Son in the face. But a foul, it's a basic misunderstanding of the law. A foul does not have to be deliberate unless it's handball, but even that's been changed. So I don't think the criticism of the referee, Chris Kavanagh, was fair. And I think that if you unpick things actually as they were, you see a much more textured picture than the almost universal condemnation of the incident or of the outcome of the incident would suggest. Discuss.
I mean, you touched upon some interesting points there, Paddy. And I want to talk to Ian about this, because I think that the main problem that exists, well, especially within VAR, is the inconsistencies that you see with a lot of the referees. So I think the one thing, Paddy may have that interpretation of the McTominay incident, but I think a lot of the anger stems from the inconsistencies. I mean, we saw earlier on in the game between Newcastle and Burnley, James Kartowski raise a high boot against Sean Longstaff, and you had loads of people complaining, being like, oh yeah, that should have been a penalty and such. If that's not a penalty, then how was the referee given a foul against McTominay? But Ian, what's your assessment on VAR? Do you think it's ruining the game of football?
Well, it's certainly disrupting the narrative, which is important, and I think that's fairly obvious. I think it was always a mistake to think that somehow VAR would establish a higher level of consistency. We've just been discussing this as the laws do and as referees do, using the words natural and unnatural. Now, this isn't definitive. We also know that all sportsmen redefine what's natural when it suits them. Once you get into a habit of, as Paddy mentioned, handoffs or arms flying to keep your balance, there's no set distance about how far back they fly, how far forward they fly, how close to the side of your body there is. So we're into all these immeasurable abstractions anyway within the laws. I don't think there's a scientific solution to that, but VAR has to respond to these as much as the human being on the pitch has to respond to these. It's never going to be a catch-all.
Yeah, completely agree. And I mean, yeah, the thing with VAR, I think you see a lot of pundits nowadays, they're saying it's ruining the game, the game's gone. But a lot of it stems from, I think, the actual human aspects of it, which is the referees. And you see so many inconsistencies. And I don't think that's the wrongdoing of the technology itself. I think it just portrays how poor the standard of refereeing is in this country. Which is my main concern. But anyway, we'll move on because VAR is such a big topic. We can talk about it for hours. I want to talk about Spurs. I mean, in particular, Jose Mourinho. Ian, what do you think that the difference is between Mourinho now and Mourinho at his time at Real Madrid when he got the record 100 points? I think they scored about 120 goals, 121 goals. In that brilliant season, what's gone wrong with Mourinho?
Well, there's two quite important words that are different about those two teams: Cristiano and Ronaldo. They're two very different clubs and two very different leagues at a very different time. That was La Liga at its most, shall we say, bifocal. There were two very, very great teams in that league, and it was a very unbalanced competition. So hence the number of points both Barcelona and Madrid were compiling at that time, 10 years ago. I think I think possibly the game has changed to an extent in that. There are probably fewer guarantees if you set yourself out principally on a strategy of counterattack, partly because I think most successful teams have finessed that a lot more. So if there was a Mourinho brand, and I don't think there was a single dogma about Mourinho's management when he was very successful, it's possible that the methods have been scrutinized a bit more, and you can't be quite so schematic. But there's the Tottenham squad it's a little unbalanced in some ways, and Mourinho is at a club where he has tighter budgetary restraints than he's had at most of the clubs he's worked at.
Before I'd really like to hear Leo's take on this, but just a brief question, if I may. Would you agree that whereas Pep Guardiola was able to transfer his brand from Barcelona to an extent onto Bayern Munich, but into the far more competitive English environment with Manchester City, people might say about the money that Manchester City have to spend. They can't spend any more on players because of UEFA's rules than Manchester United or anybody else. So Pep Guardiola has been able to transfer his brand, his football, across different media, footballing media, and Jose hasn't. Is it fair to say that since Porto, that Jose's brand has kind of deteriorated?
I mean, it's easy to say that because the times of football have changed completely, and I think we can all easily get drawn into the decline of Mourinho, but I don't think this Spurs squad is as good as some of the squads he's had before. Briefly touching upon Ian's point, well, I want to bring this in with Leo as well. At Chelsea, for example, he had Ricardo Carvalho and John Terry. At Real Madrid, he had Rafael Varane and Sergio Ramos. At Spurs, he's got Davinson Sanchez and Joe Rodon. I mean, Leo, Mourinho's done a lot of blame on the players. I mean, could it just be that the players simply aren't good enough?
I think there is that, but I also think that, I mean, first of what Paddy said, I think we can't forget his team at Chelsea was incredibly entertaining to watch. I think it's a bad press. Damien Duff and Joe Cole and Robin and coming in.
Sorry, just briefly to butt in, I do apologise that team for 2 years was one of the best Premier League teams of all time. You're quite right. Sorry. Yeah.
With a fantastic centre-half base, and I think obviously he hasn't got that at Tottenham. The worry is with those lesser players, they seem to have inherited something from their coach that must worry fans, is that once they take a lead, there's some sort of fear that comes in maybe from the management. That it seems to me, looking in from the outside, very much looking in from the outside, that Mourinho has a terrible fear of losing face and losing in general. He doesn't want to be that guy anymore. And when they do lose, his quote last week, same coach, different players, really must have struck a chord within the squad. And God knows what they talk about when they're all together. So I think, worryingly for Spurs, rather than bringing some sort of Mourinho brand and backs against the wall and dogged football and counter-attack style, he's brought some sort of fear, his own fear, to the club. He seems to be, I mean, you can actually feel it reverberate around an empty stadium even. They go 1-0 up and you feel something happening there. That's without fans. Imagine if a crowd there, you know.
Somebody made the point, one of the analysts on TV made the point that he's very, very lucky that fans aren't. There's some managers actually hugely benefiting from the fact that there aren't crowds to boo their teams off the field.
I think David Moyes and West Ham could say that. I think the start of their season might have got very tricky.
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't be surprised if Gold and Sullivan are wondering how to keep the ground empty.
Well, they're not doing a very good job about it. They're likely to. They're on course for the Champions League.
They'll probably pay for all the season ticket holders' style.
Actually, I'd be interested, particularly from Leo with centre halves. Do you think some players in certain areas of the pitch are benefiting from crowdless stadium? The reason I ask this is because it was put to me a few months ago by somebody who's coached in various leagues that the centre halves, the centre backs have a particular problem with this, because the benefit of high concentration levels caused by a crowd are just that little bit better for them. Now, this might sound like a completely arbitrary theory, but you know, when you start looking at what the year of crowdlessness has done to centre backs, apart from injuring most of them, would you agree, Leo? This has been a poor year for centre backness.
I think we've still got Diaz at Man City, who might be involved in a player of the conversation, but I think otherwise you're right, and they've been scrutinised, and as I said before, a lot of stand-ins have been scrutinised, a lot of midfielders playing back there. Certain coaches love that. But I think I'm back to your original point. I mean, I wrote the book just before it finished it before the crowds dispersed. But two interviews stand out on your point. One was with Terry Butcher very early on in the book, and I asked, we were talking about back to the wall defending that we so associate with Terry, although that often negates his actual skill on the ball. He's a very good passer of the ball, Terry. But I sort of created a mythical game in his head, and I said, let's just pretend you're 1-0 up Ipswich Town and 1-0 up at Old Trafford with 8 minutes to go, and it's backs against the wall, and 55,000 United fans are getting their back up, and they want you to fail. And I do genuinely think I might have brought a tear to his eye.
As no striker ever did, Leo.
He said those were the moments, those were the moments. And I mean, that's when I got the title of the book. He said, I used to shout, "Thou shalt not pass." And then he'd also say to Russell Osman, "Fix bayonets."
Yeah.
And so the four of them, Mick Mills, George Burley, him and Russell, and also Cooper behind them. He said those were the moments he loved, and it must have stemmed from the bit I said about the crowd wanting him to fail. I think really engage with him. And I think you're absolutely right. It would certainly focus his mind. And then another interview I did was with Van Dijk. And I'd watched a lot of Van Dijk last season. And there were times in the game where Liverpool they did so well because their fullbacks would go on and they would leave 2-on-2 at the back, knowing that he could be trusted. And there was a game at home, I remember, at Anfield, that Watford were playing very well and getting in a lot, getting in behind, and it was 0-0. And I think Troy Deeney, or it might have been Sarr, would get in and the crowd would scream, Van Dijk, do something. Make a tackle, block. And rather than listening to that and being that focusing him, he would, I think you might have noticed it, Van Dijk has got this thing where he jogs over to the player in the box. He doesn't sprint, he doesn't lunge. He sort of, and I asked him about it, he says, I want them, I need to be close and get there, obviously, but I want them to make the decision.
Yeah.
And also, you've got to have a big trust in your goalie. You know, I think he could do that more with Alisson there with Garrick. But I think he would think, right, they're in, so there's not much me lunging in and maybe he can take me out. Or I want him to have all the time in his head to maybe get it wrong. I mean, great centre forwards won't, but I think that coolness under the crowd pressure interested me. So there's two ways of looking at it, depending maybe on generations. I'm not sure.
When you look at Spurs, I mean, when you talk, sorry, Ian, you talk about centre halves. I mean, one of the best centre halves I've seen in the last 10 years wasn't playing for Spurs yesterday, and I may be been misinformed about this, but somebody said he's not injured. Toby Alderweireld. I mean, unless he's been doing something really training very badly, why was he not on that park? Because although he probably would, Leo, I defer to everyone on this. As a defender, he would probably be an 8.5. As a passer, he'd probably be a 9.5, Alderweireld. And I think that Spurs, because of the way they play, lose a hell of a lot. I thought Dyer had a nightmare, absolute nightmare, playing people onside all the time. And I thought Alderweireld was kind of the elephant in the room throughout that match, and why he wasn't playing, I don't know. I suppose we'd have to ask Jose. I
think the physical, he's a great physical specimen too. I think the matchup with Cavani would have suited Spurs much more if he had been involved in it. Guy with a young centre half next to him was poor yesterday. But he's Dyer, because I think he's not a natural centre half himself. So
Eric Dyer,
half next to him.
Eric Dyer isn't.
I don't think Eric Dyer is a natural centre half.
Do you know? I don't think Eric Dyer knows that his best position is not centre half.
Yeah.
And that it's, you know, obviously he's the expert. He makes the decision. But I don't think he's a centre half in a million years. I mean, I think he's an all right centre half. I think as a holding midfield player, he's very good. Sorry, Ian, you were going to say something there.
Well, I was going to again ask Leo if, and this is, I seem to be launching a advocacy for failing centre halves in this particular year, but I'm wondering also, because of the contracted season and the reduced training time, the particular drills and the refined drills that a good back four or back three needs now, because there's less time for that. Are we seeing more of, say, Eric Dyer not judging the line well enough?
I think you could be. I think yesterday Jose got the selection wrong. If you're going to play Rodon, who's an up and coming centre half and looked a little bit, lost at times, he needed someone to guide him. So I get your point that training and drills have gone, but I mean, if you saw the City game? I mean, once they had one player advantage, I think John Stones' performance was incredible, wasn't it? I think he became a sort of playmaking midfielder. He was dribbling. 32 passes in the opposition half, but didn't make one tackle. Now, I think he didn't make one tackle. He was a centre half. So I think it depends. I mean, we could talk a lot about Bielsa and Pep's view of centre halves, because that's fascinating. And I think Pep would love that stat that he made 32 passes and not one tackle, even though, and actually he wasn't really to blame for the winning goal, Stones. It was a great pass, but it does sort of make one think where we're going with tactics and centre halves,
I mean,
well,
yeah,
you wonder if they're going back a century.
Yeah.
To when to 2-3-5, and the centre half being a midfield player before Herbert Chapman changed it. It is an extraordinary development, but it is becoming more and more that. Probably started with what was known as the Mauro Silva position, where the holding midfield player slots in between the two centre backs, and the full backs become wing backs. But
no, yeah. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, no, carry on.
No, yeah, I was just going to say, because Leo touched upon, we could talk about Bielsa and Pep and stuff, and I did really want to get onto Leeds' performance against Manchester City.
Oh yeah.
I thought they were brilliant defensively, considering they were down to 10 men. Leo, what was your assessment on the game? I mean, it was almost like the sorcerer against the sorcerer's apprentice in the fight. So what did you make of the game?
Well, it was fascinating. I think Leeds sort of, their problems at centre half have slightly gone under Liverpool's radar. I think they've had just as many problems, haven't they? But whereas Liverpool playing midfielders back there has raised eyebrows, I think Bielsa's all for that. In fact, like Pep, he'd like a team with midfielders back there. So I was really impressed. I mean, Ian will know much more about Llorente than I do, but I was really impressed with him. And his run of games back in the side seems to have got them really flying even further than they were, So I think having that base, whilst also being the energetic the centre halves in Leeds team were just fascinating me, because I came across a quote about it was from one of City's backroom staff, who called being a centre half for Pep a bastard of a job. But I mean, when you think about Bielsa centre halves, it'd be a much stronger word that I won't use. It's constant moving. I think he plays that murder ball, doesn't he, Bielsa?
Murder ball, yeah.
But then they're not one-trick ponies, because they went down to 10 men and they had to sit in deep, and they did it brilliantly. It was, I think Cascarino today has called it an example of how to play with a man down, and they really sat in deep and sort of dictated the play with one man less. So it was a remarkable performance. I think Pep had a look in his eye of saying, well, fair enough. If we're going to lose this season, let it be that one.
Oh yeah, it was as you said, it was a brilliant performance. But I think the actual coverage of Marcelo Bielsa has intensified more since he's been in England. And I really wanted to get stuck into Ian about his time at Bilbao. I think it was the 2011 to 12 season, where I think they were runners-up in the Europa League, and then they were runners-up of the Copa del Rey. In Spain at that time, Ian, did Bielsa get the same amount of coverage he received as he is now in England, or did people just look at him being, oh yeah, he's just this manager that's just performing well in La Liga?
No, I think he did generate a huge interest, because he came with this sort of cult following, which he seems to have taken everywhere. And of course, he was at a club with huge regional pride, which is a kind of club he tends to select, actually. Athletic Bilbao, Marseille, Leeds United. There's a line there. Athletic also has its unique distinction that we can't call it a policy, because it's not a policy, but they have a philosophy of only selecting players with roots in the Basque region. So that has its own transfer constrictions and so on. And he was terrific with them. They reached the European final, which is for Athletic Bilbao. That is a once in a generation thing. Plus, as you say, the cup final. What did happen? And he had some very good players. He had Fernando Llorente. He had Javi Martinez, still going at Bayern Munich. And the sales of the players that grew up with him were good economically for Athletic. What did become very clear then was this thing that also follows Bielsa around, of the pacing of a season. That the high energy game, which was transfixed. I think there was a famous fixture tie against Manchester United, wasn't there, in that
Europa League,
league run, which I think showed a big audience. The admirable football that he'd created there. But yeah, the fatigue that kicked in at the end of the 2 seasons was very noticeable and diagnosed as just getting the physical demands unbalanced. It was just too intense, and there was then a fall off. And of course, this followed him to Leeds in the Championship, didn't it, for successive seasons. But seems to have been solved now, dare we say?
I mean, Paddy, what do you make of Bielsa's Leeds? Because every time I do see them, I think they're just such an entertaining watch. And with a brand of football, I think we haven't been so accustomed with in English football. What's your opinion on Leeds United this season? I mean, because
like you, I do enjoy watching them. I think you get a lot of football for your money. You watch them and you can't believe that there's not a crowd screaming at down the necks all the time, because they just play as if completely. And you look at Bielsa, and I mean, I can remember Bielsa when he was manager of Argentina. Ian will remember which tournament it was, and I can remember
2002.
2002, that's right. And I remember thinking, the guy's got an aura, but it's not in a good way, not in a Martin O'Neill way. It's a kind of aura that makes you think, I'll go and cut my throat. But and he's got even more gloomy and introspective in his demeanor since then. But the players clearly believe in everything about his method and his philosophy and his methodology. And it is great to watch them, because the way he's got 100% out of just about every member of the squad. And I think but there've been so many questions about Bamford over the years, and he good, but is he that good? Well, I think he's been magnificent, but so have they all. I mean, there's not been a bad player. And Cooper, the captain, maybe a little unlucky to get sent off on Saturday. There's a guy that could be playing at the third level of football, really, if technically. But here he is, a respectable Premier League, a respectable centre half in arguably the most competitive league in the world. So it's fantastic. Long may it last. I don't know. Does he have a reputation for being like Mourinho, a sort of 3-season burnout man, or is that...
I mean, his record is the burnout goes both ways. Players get burnt out. I mean his managerial career is it's an enigma, isn't it? How long was it to days? There's Marseille was extremely abrupt. I think he went into his second season, which is always a bit touch and go whether that's going to happen at all with Bielsa. Went into his second season, and 90 minutes later he was walking. I mean, so and actually interesting you should mention the Argentina thing, because that was a real failure. He was he was ushered into that job with a very, very good squad. That was Veron, Crespo, as the great thinker of Argentinian football, finally he's got the national job. This is it, and they were bundled out in the first round. Thanks partly to a David Beckham penalty. And then interestingly, he didn't leave. He then took them to the Olympic gold medal, which is okay, a sort of it's a footnote, but it was quite important. It felt like something that felt like Bielsa had achieved, and also brought through some young players who would be fixtures for the time being. So I think Leeds fans have been on tenterhooks for 3 years, haven't they? That he's going to suddenly walk, because that's what he's done in the past.
It's very, very, very interesting.
He's clearly enjoyed this season. For all his gloomy mask, he must have enjoyed this season and must want Premier League football with crowds. You know, that's
Leo, you were going to say.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Ian, because as you said, Paddy, there is this gloomy, especially with the interpreter with him, a sort of gloomy side to him that we see. But there must be something that we don't see, and I wondered if Ian knew anything about it, because I know that Klopp only recently has said, I need to get an atmosphere in the dressing room before a game. I've just realised that without the fans, I really need to get that atmosphere going, and that's something clearly Bielsa does do. I'd love to know what he's like with the players, if he sort of tries to generate that very South American dressing room, very loud, do you know if he gets everyone going? Because they're always at it, even when they're not playing well, they're pumped, aren't they? I just wondered if it's players with ghetto blasters on. God, that makes me sound old. I was like, don't say ghetto blasters. But you know, I wonder if his methods are taken from the training ground, and if you know anything about how he gets players so pumped.
I once talked to Javi Martinez some years ago about this, actually, and yes, Leo, he occasionally puts a gramophone on. No, but I think you know, yes, he's not a rock and roller in the way Jurgen Klopp might like to think Jurgen Klopp is a rock and roller, but the intensity is important, and the team talks aren't like the very long press conferences typically, so I'm told. And also, I do think that for all the slightly Martinet qualities, you know, that the drive in training and the rigor and the fitness, I think he's very clever at encouraging self-expression. Yeah. So, you know, I think if you walked into one of his dressing rooms with a Mozart concerto, Leo, I think that'd be absolutely fine, and he'd say yes.
I'm really, that probably might work at Salzburg. But Omar, I'm sorry to cut in here, but we've got to make sure that we don't overrun. Yeah. And we would be absolutely mad if we don't get the boys talking about the Clásico. How many Clásicos have you covered, Ian?
I'd love to come up with the answer, and rest assured that now that you've asked the question, I will go back and count up and tally accurately. But
what did you think of this one?
But more than 20 years worth. It was utterly gripping. It wasn't one of the most refined. I think any of us, you know, we can all think of more refined Clásicos we've seen. But it was also a great argument for how the weather can be a great leveler, even for two super clubs. It was absolutely drenched, wasn't it, in the second half?
Ian,
and you know, I thought Madrid did very much what they'd done to Liverpool a few days earlier. They worked out how to get some control early, and then held on quite efficiently, and the old stagers did what they do very well, and Vinicius was magnificent again.
Well, you could see what the fuss was about, couldn't you?
I want to pose a question to all of you, really. Is Karim Benzema the most underrated striker in the world?
Leo?
I'm not sure if he's underrated. I think he probably doesn't get talked about enough. But he's one of those players that when he does, everyone says great things about him. I just don't think he's, for some reason, hasn't had that sort of football sex appeal as much as others. But when you talk about him and look at his game, it's absolutely superb. You know, he was like an old school centre forward, isn't he? He's like, we talked about Cavani earlier. So it just shows, and you know, we could talk about Haaland and his appeal, and there seems to be that sort of centre forward that is being called for. So I don't know if he's underrated. I just think not talked about enough. If that isn't totally not making sense.
Well then, Leo, I'll rephrase my question. Is he underappreciated then?
Possibly, yes. Possibly, yes. I think he was playing at a time that, you know, Ian touched on it earlier, where, you know, these two superpowers were going toe to toe, and they have done over the years with two names that are just dominant when it comes. I mean, if you've got any time to talk about anything after you've talked about Ronaldo and Messi, then you might touch on Benzema. But it's now their game's waning, maybe, and he's, you wouldn't be surprised if Real Madrid won the Champions League this season, and he is the one talked about.
I mean, he certainly inspired Paul Pogba, who tried the same finish, with unfortunate results. But no, it's interesting, isn't it? When you think of you would probably say the best centre forward in Europe would be Robert Lewandowski, aged 32, 33. Benzema's now 33, and it's strange in the centre forwards. Used to be finished at 30, but because of fitness now, and I don't want to go back to, is it a contact sport and all that, but because it is less of a contact sport than it used to be, we get more players, and we're able to enjoy Benzema. Had Benzema lived in the era and Lewandowski lived in the era of Marco van Basten, they wouldn't be playing at the age of 33. And I just think sometimes things in football do get better. And, these two and Benzema, by the way, I think is playing better football than he's ever played in his life at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the debate around La Liga, because a lot has been made of a serious decline in the standards compared to the Premier League, for example. But obviously Real Madrid, that they've arguably got one foot in the semi-final, unless Liverpool perform a Barcelona 0.2 again. Do you think, I mean, I'll come to Ian, do you think there has been a decline in the standards of La Liga football in recent times? And because a lot of talk has been made out of it and all, but Real Madrid are close to a semi-final. They could win, they could do the double this season. Or what's your opinion on that?
No, I do. Well, the performance in the European club competitions, and I mean, both of them. There is a dip from a very high standard that was maintained over many years, and I think the UEFA coefficient now has recently elevated the Premier League above La Liga. And yes, I think you gauge the quality of the player, don't you? The two big recruiters, Barcelona and Real Madrid. There was a decade where basically, if you were Premier League Player of the Year, then within a couple of years you'd be going to one of those, wouldn't you? From Modric, Luis Suarez, Gareth Bale, and so on. I don't think that's automatically the case anymore, and and clearly the funds aren't there to do that quite so regularly. And I do, you just have to ask Lionel Messi, has the standard of his team declined at all? And he's back before he bellows the answer at you.
Well, there's only one way of answering that, other than yes, it has declined, and that's by using the word Pedri, the latest graduate from the Masia, who I mean, we're all here because we love football. Is Pedri and Messi obviously, but is Pedri also the reason we love football?
Yes, I agree with you. And I don't think the comparisons with Iniesta are absurd. I thought he was rather poor actually in the Clásico, but I think that's also because even at the age of 19 he has set such a high standard. Yes, lovely footballer. Yeah.
Now I know that Omar, you had a theory about Harry Kane, and we, as I say, I have to push us on because we've determined not to overrun. But what can you just explain what you were saying before we started about Harry Kane? Because I think this is interesting, and I want to know what the boys think.
Yeah, so I had a theory about Harry Kane's future because a lot has been speculated about it recently. Because, I think the recent reports came out that said Harry Kane will push a transfer if Tottenham fail to qualify for the Champions League, and the position they're in now, that they're 6 points off the top four, it looks highly unlikely that they will qualify for the Champions League because they're out the Europa League as well. And my theory was, I'll see what you guys think of it. But I think Harry Kane will stay at Spurs. And the reason I think Harry Kane will stay at Spurs is because I think Mourinho will leave at the end of the season from Tottenham. And he'll leave because Daniel Levy, you know, he's a owner that likes to keep valued assets. He doesn't want to see his players decline in terms of value. And at the moment, I think some of them are. And, you know, top four, I think Spurs rely heavily. There's much more heavy emphasis in terms of the finances for top four, especially for Spurs, because of the new stadium and so on. And I think that because of that, Mourinho will leave. I think Daniel Levy will.
And who will replace him?
And I think Julian Nagelsmann will come in. You know, he's been dubbed the mini Mourinho. He's only 33 years of age. He's a fantastic manager, I think, where he's already showing signs of being a fantastic manager. I think he got to, was it the semi-final of the Champions League last year? So yeah, that's my theory. I'll see what you guys have to make of it, but I think Harry Kane will stay at Spurs because I think Mourinho will go.
Right.
What about Harry Kane as player manager? Kind of covers all your bases if you're Daniel Levy. Then you keep and you get
and save a salary.
Yeah, save a salary.
Yeah.
words that Levy will like, I'm sure. But I think it reminds me of the Steven Gerrard time at Liverpool in 2004 and then 2005, and I think that sort of pressure on him is going to mount, and then with that comes pressure on the club to deal with it. I think the differences lie with Gerrard had already won stuff and could maybe see that they were going places that Rafa came in, and you know, he was, for all the problems Rafa and Stevie had, I think there was a respect and that there was a groundwork being set. So I think with Harry, and I'm not sure about his relationship with Mourinho, but you know, it's probably changes one day to the next. I don't know, but I think he will stay, maybe because he's got enough years left on his contract for Levy to demand a huge fee, which just might be too difficult at this time to get.
Yeah.
So I think that adds the pressure on. So I agree. If I had to put my money on it, I'd say he stays for all sorts of reasons. But well, you heard it here first, the player manager bit.
Ian, assuming that Harry decides to concentrate on his playing career for the time being, the Nagelsmann theory, what do you think about that?
Well, yes, I mean, I think, you know, Nagelsmann is very openly ambitious. He's young. I think that his ambitions direct him towards the Premier League as much as anywhere else. I wonder if the next manager of Tottenham Hotspur, and I'm not as convinced as Omar that person will be appointed this summer, is going to look at what the optimum time to be the next manager of Tottenham Hotspur is. Yes. And I wonder if it might be a little way in the future, especially if you're as young as Julian Nagelsmann and can expect to have many offers.
Just as I think neutrals like me rejoiced that Steven Gerrard stayed at Liverpool throughout his career, I think I would like, as a neutral, I would like Harry Kane to stay with Spurs, the club of his heart, and I much prefer a player who wants to win trophies for a club than a player who wants to leave his club and then join another in order to win trophies. I think there's a huge difference. And anyway, that's what I feel. But what I do feel as well, as we bow out, is that I'm very, very grateful that Leo was able to answer my call this morning when we found out from.
I'm up that early on a Monday.
I know, I was astonished. I know the pubs are closed, but anyway, you were there bright and early, and Leo, I thank you very, very much. I know you're a Liverpool fan, and that's the best substitute performance I've seen since the days of Davy Fairclough. You will definitely be a starter. From now on, you are a starter, guaranteed.
I feel like Nathan Phillips coming in for Van Dijk.
No, Davy Fairclough. Ian, too, thank you very much for coming in. We could listen to you on the Clásico for hours, but we were absolutely determined to be disciplined time-wise. Thanks very much. And Omar, great to work with you again. Do you want to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, I just want to echo, as I always do, to say thank you both for coming on as well. We really appreciate your time. It's been a fascinating hour listening to both of you. So everybody just make sure you like, share, subscribe, and follow this perspective as per usual. And we will see you for the next one. Cheers.